Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that the world has shifted dramatically, and we wanted to respond to the times that we're in by offering you some practical insights. So I'm so delighted to be joined today by Chip Griffin, who is the founder and CEO of Agency Leadership Advisors. And I could go on and on singing Chip's praises. He is such a deep knowledge expert in business, period, in good times and in bad times. And he has a decades long track record of helping companies to grow their business in any type of economy or crisis. Because believe it or not, this is not the first crisis that we've ever faced. It's not the first time that our economy has been challenged. And so he's here to help us all with some practical insights and strategies. So I'm going to turn it over to Chip at this time. A couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions, there is a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also chat. If there are insights that you'd like to share on social media, we encourage you to do that. Please tag Chip. It's at Chip Griffin, right, on pretty much everything. And use the hashtag #SoloPR so that we get that. We will be taking questions at the end. If we don't get to all of your questions, don't hesitate to put them in the box anyway, and I'll make sure that we get answers out to all of you. And then the chat is also open, so feel free to use that as well. And of course, this webinar will be recorded and it will be sent out to everyone today, later today. Should be about an hour after the broadcast, but it depends on the demand on the system. And I see that I have a question. So Chip, over to you while I find out what this question is about. It's probably something technical.
Great. Well, thank you, Karen, for having me. Thank you for creating this forum for folks to ask questions and get information. We really, we have a vibrant community here, and it's a great opportunity for us all to be able to help each other. And so hopefully over the course of the next hour or so, we'll be able to touch on a lot of the questions and concerns that you have. Obviously, some things are unknowable at this point, but we're going to make our best estimates on what we know. And as Karen said, I have been through a number of, I can't say things just like this because really there's nothing that's ever been just like this, but I've been through running a business during September 11th and during the 2008 recession. And so, I know that all of these things are challenging and they're going to create a lot of short-term challenges, even pain, but there are also opportunities that exist in it. And ultimately, we'll be able to come out on the other end stronger as long as we're working our way through it and being thoughtful about the choices that we make in the coming days, weeks, and months. So I've got a few brief comments just on generally how I think folks should be looking at the current situation. And then we're going to leave most of the time, though, for your questions, because really that's what this is. This is an opportunity for you to address the things that are on your mind. So let's just jump in quickly to a couple of my overarching thoughts that I think, let's see. Got to resume the slideshow because it doesn't want to. There we go. So the first thing is don't panic. And look, I'm a sports official, and one of the things that we are always taught, whether we're umpiring baseball or refereeing basketball, is don't tell a coach to calm down because that will only cause them to actually get more exercise. So when I say don't panic, it's not so much about how you're feeling, it's really about how you're reacting. And so what I'm really saying here is don't make decisions out of panic, because if you are making those kinds of decisions, they're unlikely to work out for you over the long term. So try to be thoughtful, try to take a little bit of time to contemplate the decisions that you're making for your business, for your clients in the time ahead, because it's very easy to overreact to the latest bit of information, whether that's a client saying they want to cut back or some news in the environment. So really just, pause a beat before you start taking action. And the corollary to this is you're not a superhero. You're not going to solve every problem. You're not going to solve every client problem. You're not going to solve every problem in your business. You're certainly not going to solve all of the problems in the community around you. So try to be reasonable in what you can achieve, and set yourself some reasonable goals, because all of these crises, whether it's this or September 11th of 2008 or any of the things that may affect just your business, the more you can break it down into manageable chunks, the easier it's going to be to succeed. So don't try to just, as a friend of mine likes to say, boil the ocean, and instead try to solve one problem at a time and understand that you're not going to fix everything. The next point is be human. And by this, I mean, be human to your clients, be human to your contractors, be human to your prospects. Just, really try to be more understanding than usual about everyone, because everybody is feeling stressed in this situation. Everybody is feeling some kind of pressure. It's either pressure because they're inundated, or it's pressure because they're missing out on revenue, or it's pressure because they're concerned about their own health or a family member's health. So really just, again, be thoughtful about how you deal with them. So this would not be the time that I would say you want to go to the wall enforcing contract provisions with clients. Work with them to find a solution. Same thing with contractors. Be open and compassionate with them, because you're probably going to have to cut back on some of your own contractors if you have them. You may need to cut back on some of the services that you're using from third-party vendors. Just have those human conversations and try to find solutions instead of that protective instinct that a lot of us have to use whatever tools in our contracts or such that we may have in order to move forward. Okay, but now that we've sort of talked big principles, you do have to be looking at your expenses. And frankly, this is a good exercise to do even if times are good and there's no possible pressure, no clients are thinking about pausing work or that kind of thing. But particularly now, take time to look through all of your expenses, particularly things like subscriptions. If you're anything like me, you probably have accumulated a lot of subscriptions over the years, and they just ride on your credit card and you don't think about them. And now is the time to sit there and say, do I really need this particular service or that particular service? Prune it as much as you can, because you want to give yourself the wiggle room. Even if you're busy right now, even if you're a crisis comms consultant, although frankly, if you're a crisis comms consultant, you're probably not on this webinar because you're so up to your ears with your client work anyway. But even if you are just getting all sorts of extra business, still look at your expenses, because you don't know what 3, 4, 5 months down the road holds. And the more that you can control your costs now, the more runway you have to survive things going forward. So just take a look at those kinds of things. And unfortunately, as solos, and even though I'm not a solo agency now, I am a solo consultant, I realize that there are a lot less expenses that we can cut, because in the agency world, usually what you do is cut staff. Well, if you're solo, you don't have staff to cut. So, everything that you're cutting is probably coming out of your own compensation ultimately. So try to find as many of those third-party expenses that you have as possible to give you wiggle room. But don't just focus on the negative, because while that's there, you really need to be thinking about what are the opportunities. And this means rethinking how you are doing your business. If you've got clients that are shifting in what their revenue is. So if you're working for an industry that's had a contraction, if you're working for the cruise industry, obviously major issues there. You need to rethink the services that you're providing. If you're in an industry where people are just generally suffering across the board, maybe you need to find some lower cost options to provide them. If you've been doing a lot of in-person work, try to find ways to do more remote, but it may not be a one-for-one replacement for the way you're doing it now. It may be a more creative rethink of how you are doing the work that you do. And in that, you may find a new model that actually works better. And 18, 24 months down the road, you may find that you are doing even better than you thought you would, because you took this time to innovate and be creative. Because it really is, it's an opportunity for everybody to sit here and try different things. We're seeing it already in some of the activities that we're seeing. Karen and I were talking earlier about how many webinars are taking place today. A lot of people are experimenting with this format. Fortunately, we're folks who've been doing it for a long time, so it comes a little bit easier to us. But even if you haven't been in webinars, maybe that's something you need to look at. If you've been doing in-person training, try to do some remote things. So there are a lot of opportunities to be had. You just need to be on the lookout for them and not say, I just need to keep doing business as usual. And absolutely critical, keep prospecting. Do not fall into the trap that, oh my God, nobody wants to hear from me. Everybody's got their stress. Yes, but a couple of things. So first of all, there are some people, and some of you may be those people listening right now, who just want some normalcy in your life. And so business as usual actually sounds pretty good. And we're fortunate in some respects in this industry in that we can do our jobs for the most part remotely. And if you're solo, that's how you've been typically doing things. There are people in other industries who don't have anything else they can do. If you're a restaurant worker, you're probably stuck at home and there's nothing that can take your mind off of the current situation. We at least have that opportunity. There are lots of other folks out there, our clients, our prospects, who are the same way. And so you need to be mindful. I mean, I probably wouldn't go prospecting into a hospital right now, okay, because they're inundated. So unless you've got an existing connection and you can help them in their immediate problem, don't focus on that. But there are lots of industries out there that are still doing just fine and that still need communications help. They still need PR help. They need marketing help. All the services that we're providing, they need, and they may actually be more available to talk. So find ways, put information out there that will be helpful. You know, you don't have to be a salesperson and engage in sleazy sales tactics, but you need to keep prospecting during this time because it takes time to get a new client. So please, if you take nothing else away from this conversation today, don't stop prospecting. And then finally, I would say you need to be willing to ask for help. One of the things that I've learned in all my years in business is that nobody knows you need help unless you ask for it. Nobody knows that you're looking for a particular kind of client unless you let them know. Nobody knows what you do unless you tell them. So you need to be having conversations with your close network in online forums, in the solo PR group, in some of the Slack channels that are out there, wherever it is, ask for help. Explain what your challenge is. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to pivot your business so that you can focus on a kind of service that's more in demand right now than what you've been doing, or a new way of delivering it. Ask. If you don't ask, you won't get that help. So really make yourself available for that advice, for that input from other people. And obviously the fact that you're participating in this webinar suggests that you're already open to getting some help, but just be open, be vulnerable. This is a time when the community really is coming together and trying to help each other. So take advantage of that. And so with that, you know, I've tried to keep my comments here brief enough that we can really tap into the questions that you have. So at this point, I would pitch it over to Karen to see where we want to go from here.
Great. So I am sure that we have lots of questions. Thank you so much for framing that and providing that background. I think all of those things are really important as you're looking at ways to trim your expenses, because that's never a bad idea during a time like this when you want to be proactive and try to improve your cash reserves along with improving your cash flow. Don't forget about your personal expenses and ways that you can trim your budget that way too. There's so many ways to do that. The one thing that you can control is cash, your cash spend. So the things that are not fixed, you know, it's not a mortgage, it's not a car payment, it's not insurance payment, but it's those variable things that fit into that big broad category of cash. There are ways that you can, you know, change that. And don't forget, we'll start trying to collect some resources too, but there are a lot of services right now that are offering a break and offering free months, even for current subscribers. So take advantage of anything that you can, because if you're using a service and they've agreed to waive fees, that's helpful. And even though you may not need it at the moment, still that's cash that you can redeposit back into your reserves at this time. So we want to go ahead, Chip.
No, I was just going to say along those lines, I think, you know, one of the things that solos need to take advantage of are the payment terms that they have from vendors, particularly large vendors. And, you know, we're all always complaining about how big companies are, you know, sticking it to us with payment terms. Turn the tables. If you've got a large company vendor, don't pay the bill early. Okay, now if you're dealing with a small contractor, that may be a different story because you want to, again, be human. But if you've got, you know, a bill due to Verizon or something like that, no offense to my friends who work at Verizon, don't pay it before it's due. Give yourself as much runway as you have possible. So, you know, and I know that a lot of solos, you know, simply they get the bill, they pay the bill, and it feels good to sort of just make sure that there's nothing hanging out there. But now more than ever is an opportunity to make sure that you maintain cash flow by taking advantage of whatever payment terms you do get.
Absolutely. That's a great tip. On the flip side, you know, there's a movement right now that is, I want to say that it's pay it forward, and it's encouraging businesses to pay their contractors early. So if they have 30 or 45-day net payment terms, they're encouraging them, pay them now because they could use the money, don't hold on. And so, you know, that's another way to get cash in. For many of us, hopefully that's not an issue. And we should, again, focus on ways that we can trim, but then as well, you want to focus on business development. I feel like such a broken record, but I know that I say this 365 days a year. Never, ever, ever, ever stop business development. It's something that you should be doing. Even if you're so busy, you think that you're going to vomit if you get one more piece of business, because having a full pipeline gives you choice, and you always want choice. So if somebody goes away or you want to fire someone, you're in a much better position when you have the choice to activate a new client. And now, as we're telling our clients that now is not the time to cease public relations and marketing efforts, the same really applies to you as well. Don't stop. Yeah, you can be sensitive to the times, but there are so many creative ways for you to pivot during this time. So now, again, we want to start to take your questions. Okay, someone is saying that some people had an issue going in, and what we got on early to make sure that the system itself was working. This is being recorded, and I'll make sure to share out the recording, but we believe that what we found is happening, and it's not the platform, it's people's individual broadband connections. So some people I've been having issues this week too with broadband, because I guess of all of, so many people accessing it that are not normally accessing it at the same time. But we don't, all of you made it in. I'm not sure what's going on. There's not much that we can do about it. But if you have people that are texting you or messaging you, just let them know that we'll definitely be sharing this recording widely to make sure that everybody gets the information. Okay, so questions. Here's one. Is it normal to ask for a client to do a contract extension if they are asking to quit for now?
So look, this goes into the be human category, which is just have an open, transparent conversation with your client, and try to figure out how you can, shape things to your advantage. So if a client comes to you and they want to cancel, see if you can get them to pause. If they want to pause, see if you can put some structure around that. See if there are ways that you can, maybe you get them to continue to pay you, but over time, so that it's manageable for their individual situation. So what I would say to that is just be creative about how you do it. It may be a contract extension at some point. It may be changing the terms of an agreement. It's certainly not a time to sit there and say, well, my contract requires, a 60-day notice to cancellation, and you're going to have to, pay all that right now. If they don't have the money, that doesn't help. So try to work with them on their individual situations. Chances are, if they come to you with a challenge, it's because they're really hurting. And so it's up to you to try to figure out how to make that work so that it's to your advantage over time.
Agreed. Sorry, I have challenges of having my fur child with me today. So I would also add, get in front of that as much as possible. Again, if it's no money, that's an issue that you really can't fix. But if it's not an issue of money, but maybe it is on some level an emotional decision of that business feeling like, oh my God, there's going to be a downturn and I need to trim expenses, or they feel like there's nothing that you can do because there's a crisis, you need to be proactive. And so what I did is we got in front of this by being proactive with my own clients, by strategizing in advance with our team, and then going to our clients and pivoting for them. So we drove the pivot, like, hey, we know that this is going on, but here, we're going to shift our plan a little bit, and here are the things that we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. And so clients were like, oh, okay. So there was never a question of, well, there's going to be nothing for you to do. There's plenty to do.
Right.
And there's honestly, even with media relations, I've had clients increase budget this month because of all of the increased activity. I'm not saying that that's 100%. Nothing is ever 100%, but it's better to be proactive now. So if you haven't already had discussions with clients and you're holding steady, think about ways that you can demonstrate your value to them. And if you need to tweak a plan because of what's going on, you be the one to tweak it and present it and lead them down a path, rather than allowing them to come to a conclusion that is not right. we all know that it's a mistake to pause PR right now. Don't do that. There are still so many things that you can do. There's so many things that people probably put on the back burner. This is a great time to shore up plans, to really, you can improve your thought leadership, topics and programs. You can do a lot of proactive things that they need help with at this time, but to just put a stop puts them back to ground zero. And you all know that, but now it's time to think about how do you frame that with your clients.
Right. And look, I mean,
Um,
as solos, we have an advantage in that we deal directly with all of our clients. If you own even a small agency, there may be clients that you don't have direct contact with on a regular basis, but you know your clients better than anybody else. You have those personal relationships. Tap into them. Have the candid conversation so that you understand, what pressures are they feeling that maybe you haven't anticipated or you can't see. You certainly see a lot, but get them to open up to you. And frankly, as Karen says, even the most challenged industries right now. I mean, if I take a look, and I don't mean to pick on the cruise folks because I've been picking on cruises in a lot of these forums lately because it's a great example in my mind. But if you're in the cruise space, you don't want to be out there trying to get bookings right now, right? That is a lost cause, getting bookings today. But when this is all said and done, the cruise industry is going to need to rebuild its reputation and make people feel comfortable once again getting on a cruise ship. So what you can be doing now, if you're working for them, is try to come up with the plans for that, because it's going to take time to put them together. It's going to take time to put the messaging and the collateral and all of that. So you may not know exactly when the corner is going to be turned and it's time to turn it on, but work with them on planning now instead. So you can, no matter how bad the industry is, you can find something that you could be working on with them now in order to position for success for the future. So
Great points. Here's another question. I specialize in executive visibility and help clients with conference participation. I know that the advice would be to do webinars and take events virtual, but many organizations charge a hefty fee to partner for hosting webinars. How do you suggest getting around that?
So I think, one of the things that you need to be careful of is trying to make it seem like if you're going from an in-person to an online, you don't want it to seem like, quote unquote, just a webinar like this, right? You want to you need to find ways to make it more substantial and more personal. So it might be, instead of going for a large webinar, you go for a small training session where you've got 5 or 10 people on Zoom and everybody's on video, and so it has more of that feel of an in-person engagement. But you may also think about, what are some other creative things that we can do. And I was listening to, I think it was a podcast recently, where someone who was making this transition, they were sending care boxes essentially to all of the participants in advance. So people had, and it even included snacks. So in addition to whatever materials they needed for the training, they were, sort of giving that same feel that they would have had if you were in a hotel room or in the conference room or whatever, to be able to have that feeling. So you need to think about those little touches that transform it from feeling like, oh, it's one of the 25 webinars that's going on today, to something that is much more substantial. And that's where you start to get the premiums in. But the other thing to keep in mind is, as the person putting this on, your level of time commitment is going to be less for remote. So you probably can still make a better profit margin while still charging less to the client. And I think we're going to see a lasting change here. It's not going to eliminate in-person altogether, and it's not going to eliminate, working in offices and all that, but certainly we're going to see a lot more remote work. We're going to see a lot more remote meetings. And so, try to think of the ways that you can reinvent your model a little bit, because if you're not going somewhere, if you don't have to travel somewhere, you've saved yourself a ton of time. So, why not pass along some of that savings in the form of the price that you're charging to your client, and then pocket the rest. So, you get higher margin, lower cost to clients, everybody wins.
Yeah, I like that. How can you balance over servicing at this time? I want to make sure my clients survive, but how do you create balance so you have time for developing other clients? That's a great question, because we PR pros we go hard.
Look, I got to tell you, whether you're a solo or a large agency, everyone in this space over services. It's across the board. So the first piece of advice that I always have when it comes to over servicing is you need to know that you are over servicing and how much you're over servicing. So if you are not tracking your own time right now, you really ought to be. And I know nobody likes doing this. And, it sort of feels like, well, I got out of the big agency world because I didn't want to deal with timesheets and all that sort of thing. But if you don't know how you're spending your time, you don't really know how profitable your work is. You don't know how to price it appropriately. So first and foremost, you need to know what you're doing in terms of overservicing. And then you need to make a conscious decision. Look, I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't overservice right now. There are some cases where in that category of be human, it may be the right thing to do to overservice a client for a period of time, knowing that you're investing in the relationship. But you need to look at it in those terms. If I put in an extra 5 hours this week, in my mind, I have to take that 5 hours and multiply it by my hourly rate and say, I'm investing, $1,000 in this client or whatever. And it's a choice. But you have to understand that because you're doing that, you aren't, as you said, investing in business development. So is that the best use of those 5 hours? And only you can answer that. You have the best sense as to whether that client's going to produce substantial enough revenue down the road that it's worth spending that time on them now. So you really just have to make conscious decisions. And I think that's the key is don't just do it by accident. Do it because you're intentionally deciding that that's the right decision now.
That's one of my favorite words, intentional.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people got into this accidentally. Whether you're a solo or you've got a larger agency, it's oftentimes because circumstances just led you to hang out a shingle. Maybe you're between jobs, maybe you had to move somewhere with a significant other, maybe you got laid off. Who knows what it is? But it maybe that's how you got started. And so a lot of times we don't do enough to think about how do we build an intentional business. But the difference between an accidental and an intentional business is astronomical, and it hits you right in the pocketbook.
Love it. Any ideas for pivoting on media relations where we've delayed announcements? I've thought of putting together crisis communication plans for a data breach, thought leadership, as you mentioned. Any others?
So, I mean, it depends on what sector you're working on. In particular, when it comes to how do you pivot from doing media relations today. But the first thing I would say is back up. Do you need to pivot from media relations today? Because I think a lot of us are presupposing that there's no news out there other than coronavirus and COVID-19, but there are still plenty of publications out there that are looking to work on things, whether they're long lead or even short term. It's news about other things. I mean, if most of us don't want to be reading about this in our free time right now, and so we're finding sources to read about sports or entertainment or fashion or whatever it is that we're into. So those opportunities are still there. So don't start by not assuming that there's no venue for your news. You may have to change it, right? I mean, it may be that you're not going to get it into the same publications that you were getting into 3 months ago, but there may still be opportunities. But if you are going to pivot and you are going to do something else, think about what it is that your typical client prospect industry needs and try to fill that need. So don't go out there and say, okay, well, I've done this in the past and it's worked. Really, you need to sit there and ask, what is their need now? Part of that may be just calling up and asking. One of my favorite business development techniques is to call someone for advice or for their input. And I used to be involved in angel investing, and one of the things that we always told entrepreneurs who were looking for investment is, if you ask for money, we'll give you advice. If you ask for advice, we'll give you money. And there's something to be said for that. So talk to your clients and prospects and say, what are your needs right now? How has this changed things for you? And identify those gaps, because the way that you make money in these challenging times is to figure out the gaps that nobody else is filling, and then jump into the breach, solve that. Some of it may be for free, some of it may be thought leadership, but some of it may be paid. And so you just need to find those opportunities by asking questions, by listening, by observing.
Yeah, on that also, I do media relations as well. Don't forget the verticals. Many verticals are still reporting on other news, not just COVID-19. So verticals are a great option. And then my favorite tip is just to ask. If you have your targeted list of media, ask them, hey, are you taking other stories right now? I understand the times that we're living in. Are you solely focused on that? Because in some newsrooms, the reporters have all been assigned to hard news. But then others are saying, yeah, we're still taking stories. realizing that if there's breaking news about coronavirus, that's going to push anything. So don't be afraid to just communicate with the reporters and ask, what are you working on? Are you focused on COVID? Are you interested in other things? They'll talk to you and they'll tell you. I like using the phone for that purpose only. It's the only time that I can remember that my phone actually makes phone calls. So, if you have a phone number, call rather than email, and you may be surprised. I mean, they will absolutely tell you what's going on. Another tip is that a lot of freelance reporters that write for multiple publications have their own blogs, and editors have advised them at this time to write stories on their blogs. And so they're out there on Twitter looking for stories. Some of them have email newsletters that go out where they solicit queries for multiple publications, including their own content. So don't overlook those opportunities as well. And finally, peso, people. Don't just focus on earned media. Use all the spokes of the wheel. Jeannie updated her graphic, print it out, paste it to your wall. You do not only have to do earn, you've got to present some paid opportunities. Now's a great time for that. Shared and own. Please, please, please don't just focus on that E in the peso model. And that should be forever and for all times. And so if you've never done that, now is the time to get educated and to broaden your scope of work, because when you can offer clients integrated opportunities, trust me, it makes a difference. They're looking to you again for counsel. And so with more tools in your tool belt to be able to offer them, it keeps you working and it keeps their business moving forward.
And can I just underscore something you said, Karen, because it's so important, and that is you need to ask. So don't assume that a publication or a reporter is not taking queries, is not interested in what you have to talk about. Ask them. If you're just assuming that they're not interested, you're potentially missing out on an opportunity. And right now, a lot of folks in this space are assuming. So if you ask, you may actually be able to get in where you couldn't before, because everybody else is assuming that person is not interested. So there's no harm in asking. The worst they could say is, no, look, we're focused on the virus. We don't have time for this, or we don't have space in the publication, or whatever. Fine, ask.
I agree. So we have a question on timing. What time frame would you recommend that they start to plan for clients to attend conferences, start to make announcements, product content that doesn't have to do with COVID-19 again? So some are hearing August, September, but curious to know what you think and what others here are seeing and hearing.
The blunt answer is I have no idea whatsoever. Look, if I did, I would probably be, up on the podium at the White House, and even those folks don't know. Anthony Fauci has no idea when people are going to be getting back to work in these things. What I would say is, I would assume that certain things like in-person events are going to be much farther down the road. Because you have to overcome two things. First of all, you have to overcome the fact that public health officials will say it's okay to do it, but then you have to get to the point where people feel comfortable investing in it, and in-person events tend to take some lead time. So I would expect that anything in person is going to come back. If I were just guessing, and it is purely a guess, at least 6 months before in person comes back in any meaningful way whatsoever, and it may well be longer than that. As far as economically, a lot of that comes down to how long we are all in this lovely quarantine type situation. The longer that lasts, the longer it's going to take to come out of it. But the thing to keep in mind is, once they start releasing those restrictions, I think we're going to see a lot of pent-up energy, a lot of pent-up spending and investment and things, because people are going to need to try to get back to normal as quickly as possible. So you have to be prepared for it, because when it comes, it's going to come quick, I think. It's not going to be sort of a slow ramp. It's going to be people, allowed to get out and start doing things, businesses trying to come back as quickly as possible. So, be prepared for it, but it's really just watchful waiting at this point, and you need to listen to what the authorities are saying, because they know far more than I do, and even they don't have most of the answers.
I love it. Here's a question. We had some questions that came in prior to the webinar, so I want to make sure we don't miss those. My client is in a tough spot since they get paid when their customers get paid. Their customers are all in the tourism industry. What are your thoughts on payment plans?
So, going back to, having the conversation with your clients, I'm not opposed to payment plans in these scenarios, but what you need to understand is that money is at risk. So, if there's a client who is having a cash crunch and so they want to try to elongate payments, you can do it, but you need to say, okay, am I okay with it if that money never comes in the door? And it may well be that, yes, it's, given the ways that you can spend your time, it's still worthwhile to do it. But anytime you extend terms, whether that's payment plans or extending, the payment timeline, you're putting that cash at risk. So plan as if you're only going to get part of it or none of it, and you'll be better off. But if you've got a long-term client, you're trying to continue the relationship, yeah, it's worth trying to be creative with your contract terms right now, because folks are having a hard time, and if you can help them get through it, they'll remember that in most cases, or at least your client contact will. If it's a large organization, it's a little bit harder for the whole organization to feel grateful, but if you're dealing with a small to mid-sized organization, they're going to remember who was with them today. So try to be as flexible as you can, as long as it works for your individual situation.
A lot of my business was on-site facilitation and training. I'm trying to move to remote sessions, but do you have any advice on how to do that effectively?
Yeah, so again, we touched on that a little bit in the context of trying to find ways to add value so that it's a little bit more creative. But one of the things that you're going to have to look at is the whole model that you've got. Is it and part of it depends on what the in-person was getting you. Was it in person because it was helping to build relationships? Was it in person because it was just large numbers and it was the most convenient way to do it? Was it in person because it saved time? You may need to find different tools. You may need to use a combination of video conferencing and maybe some online whiteboarding tools. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take, but really, as with anything else, you want to back up and say, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Why am I doing these sessions? And then try to figure out, how do you deliver on that? So if it's on site, to develop a strategic plan, okay, maybe I do that with a combination of video conferences and a questionnaire and maybe some one-on-one sessions, in addition to whatever I do on a group basis. If it's training, you can do webinar, you can do the small group things, you can do recorded sessions, more of an online course type setup. So think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish with it, and then try to figure out, what the best mix of in-person on-site things are to solve that particular challenge.
Love it. I am a consultant to a theater company and to a music concert company. What advice and ideas for the performing arts?
Yeah, so I mean, look, performing arts is a big challenge right now. They tend to have tight budgets in the best of scenarios. I saw, I think the Metropolitan Opera laid off everybody. Was that who I saw today? So it's a very difficult time for that industry. That said, now is the time to start looking at those plans for the future, because they are going to have a future at some point. Unfortunately, they don't know exactly when it is. But they're, looking at the theater industry in particular. I think you're going to have two needs. They're going to need to try to figure out a way to shore up fundraising. So messaging that you can do to help them from a fundraising perspective, and think about, how do we communicate that particular challenge? Because you have to keep in mind that when it comes to nonprofits and fundraising, you have a twofold problem. They're not putting on the events that they normally would, that sort of supports their day-to-day operations, but the folks who are their big givers are all getting hammered in the stock market right now. And so, that means that there is less cash for them to use for philanthropy. So there's going to be a real need for nonprofits of all kinds, the theater industry, performing arts, et cetera, to have a plan in place for when we do start to get back to normal, to communicate what their needs are, to communicate to, grow attendance back at their things, because those will probably come back slower. One of the reports out of China that I've seen is that while their cases are declining and they're getting back to normal work and those kinds of things, people are not going out at night. And so people are still withholding from some of that entertainment type activity. And so I would expect that we will likely see something similar here, where people are a little more reluctant to move back, particularly when it comes to, and frankly, performing arts tends to appeal to an older audience for the most part, in my experience. It's not the same as a movie where you're going to get the 20-somethings who clearly don't care because they're sitting on the beaches in Florida right now partying up a storm. And so those people are, the older set is probably going to be a little more reluctant to get out there, out of general fear, out of concern for their spending. So, but work with your clients on planning, maybe put some thought leadership together on this. So, maybe you can't get someone to pay you for planning, but you can start putting some materials together that you share to showcase your expertise, and then you can leverage that going forward. So, really think about what value you can provide today, even if it's unpaid, because it may just be an investment in the future.
And business development tip, you can drive recovery for those clients that are super hard hit by being a connector. I share this with our mastermind group, but be the person who brings people together. So I have a client that's a founder, and he's been hosting a founder call once a week for founders to chat. His industry is not hard hit, but he's become the center so that they can connect and share ideas and share strategies of how to get through this time. You could easily do that as well. So start a private Facebook group for people in the local tourism industry so that they can connect and share ideas and share resources and come up with maybe like a local or regional plan together. So now is the time that people are more willing to bond as as a community, and we're more unified because everybody wants to help everyone else get back on their feet. So be the center of that, organize that. You could even do things like take your expertise and put out tip sheets, or do your own live sessions and webinars to help people. So you can, and again, it's business development, because if you're the person that's gathering everyone, if you're the person that's demonstrating that leadership, then when things turn around, you'll be in a much better position to be the person that they hire. So don't look outside of that. Here is a great question. So for those of us that are taking some sort of pre-planned extended leave, how can we keep the lines of communication open with clients? My main contract is up at the end of this month. I'll be out for a month, but I want to still be fresh in their mind, even though they are losing money right now in the tourism industry as a result of COVID-19.
So, I guess, for that, I would say this would be no different than if you were taking leave during a non-crisis period. You still want to be in communication. You still want to, as it leads up to it, have open conversations about, what their plans are, where things stand. If you're able to, depending on the nature of the leave, if you have the opportunity to do short notes occasionally during it. Look, as solos, we often joke about the fact that we never really get total time off. Well, that's kind of true. And, you can still, in many cases, take advantage of sending short notes, during that leave period in order to just, stay top of mind, even if it's just passing on an article or something like that. So, be creative in finding opportunities to communicate leading up to the leave, and then to whatever extent you can during the leave. But then also try to schedule something for right after the leave ends. If the leave is ending at a definite period of time, pre-schedule that you will have a conversation, a week after you return or something like that, for, an update on where things stand. And that's frankly just good advice anyway. When you're doing networking with people, whether it's a prospect or just general networking, try to set some sort of a timeline for that next communication every time you have one, so that it gives you that natural flow of events. It sort of makes sure that things don't go too long. And then the final tip is keep track of your communications, for these things, so that even if you haven't preset the time with the person, you at least have a note, I need to follow up with so-and-so in April or May or whatever. And so, you really just all of these things when it comes to networking, prospecting, or even dealing with clients is making sure that you have a cadence to it that makes sense. And so if you create that rhythm, you'll be in their minds when you need to be in their minds.
Yeah. Have I answered all of the questions here? Raise your hand if I've missed something. I know I didn't get to all of these.
While
Did
you're
I
looking at
get to
that,
everybody?
there was one other point that I just wanted to touch on, and it goes to what you were saying in answer to the previous question, and that is, now is a time to accept as many pick your brain requests as you can. And as consultants, whether we're in the PR space or otherwise, oftentimes we say, oh God, someone just wants to pick my brain again. They just want some free advice. Give it to them, particularly now. It's a great, assuming you've got the time, it's a great opportunity to spend 30 or 60 minutes on the phone with somebody and talk through what the challenges are that they're facing. Give them some free tips. You don't want to give the same person a pick your brain opportunity every week, because that then you cost yourself significant opportunity. But if you do that occasionally for folks, it's a great opportunity. First of all, you learn a lot. It's great market research. You know what the challenges are, and particularly now where there's so much uncertainty, and we're all trying to figure out what our clients need most. The more conversations you have, the more you'll learn, the more you'll be able to adapt your products and services. But you're also generating considerable goodwill, and that's really going to be important when things do get back to normal and people do start, opening their budgets up more. People remember who was there for them when they were in a challenging time. So just as your clients will remember if you give, some extra help on terms or whatever, prospects and others in the community will, take note if you were helpful to them during a challenge. So please take as many of those as you can, and think of ways to create new and interesting ones. One of the things I'm experimenting with is a virtual happy hour, because none of us can get out and go do a typical, in-person networking session. So I said, well, let's try doing on Zoom a virtual happy hour where we all just sit there and drink cocktails in front of each other on video. I mean, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, I don't know. But it's now is the time to try those interesting opportunities to have conversations, because you don't know where any of them will lead.
I agree. And we have covered this, but question, we can offer some more advice on this. What should you be doing for your own business at this time?
Yeah, so look, I mean, this is a great opportunity if you are having a cutback from your clients, and you obviously want to be spending time on business development, but it's also a great time to upskill yourself. And so, what are the gaps in your own knowledge that you want to fill at this point in time? Are there things out there that you want to learn how to do? Maybe you want to learn how to do Google Ads to help promote some of the content that you're creating, or you want to look into some different platforms. Maybe you want to experiment with doing some live video online. Maybe you want to experiment doing a webinar. You've never done one yourself. This is a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of extra time that you may have in order to try those things out. And it's also a great opportunity to just continue to research and get ideas. So, it may be that you just want to dive deeper on some of the industries that you're involved in. Typically, we spend a lot of time on our day-to-day dealing with just whatever our client's current concern is. Okay, now maybe is an opportunity, if I work in the travel and tourism space, to learn about different aspects of it that I didn't know, make myself more of an expert so that I'm ready to run with that. Maybe it's to do more networking, find opportunities to participate in more online groups where I'm just talking to different people and, building out my network. So, think about all of those different opportunities, and not that I'm encouraging to be a workaholic, but most of us have extra free time right now because we're not going to meet with clients in person. We can't go out and go to the movies or those sorts of things. So certainly we'll watch, Netflix and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. We'll read books, but ultimately we do have more time. And so if we are leveraging that to invest in our own futures as a business, I mean, we're going to come out of this much stronger when this is all said and done.
Agree. What industries are not as affected by COVID-19 but still need agencies?
Well, look, that's a great point. So, we all sit here and we think, oh my God, the sky is falling. This is, and it's easy to think that because the news is just, beating us in every single hour. with some new piece of bad news and that sort of thing. So, there is a tendency, particularly if, we've lost business or we've got, clients who are struggling, to think everybody is in the same boat. Well, that's not true. There are actually industries that are thriving. I was watching CNBC earlier today, and the president of Goya Beans was on, talking about how their business is up something like 40% in the last 3 weeks. People are apparently buying a lot of beans. Okay, I wouldn't have thought of that, but there are a lot of those industries out there. Obviously, the toilet paper industry is doing particularly well. So, if you happen to work for the toilet paper industry, you probably have an opportunity for a lot of extra work. But I mean, look, Netflix, right? I mean, Netflix is doing tremendous right now. In fact, they've been asked by Europe to cut back on their streaming from HD to standard definition so that they can have more bandwidth available for non-Netflix activities in Europe. Universal is releasing some in-theater movies online. So there are a lot of industries that are actually doing quite well right now. And so, if you think about those would be ones to look at. As far as recession-proof generally, look, I mean, in my mind, there's no such thing as a truly recession-proof industry. People will feel it in different ways, and it depends on the different ones. This is like nothing else we've ever seen. So it's difficult to compare the industries that are more resilient today in this crisis versus others, because you've got some healthcare, pharmaceuticals. I mean, those folks are in a really strong position right now. Even the ones who are not directly involved in this, I think there's just a generally greater awareness of and interest in the field. So those businesses are likely to start performing better in any case. So look at the specifics on the ground. And try to figure it out that way. But the second thing I would say is be careful about cherry picking someone that you think is recession proof, or even someone that you think is doing well today, because they may not be 6 months from now. And so what you really want to do is look and say, okay, related to the work that I currently do, what's adjacent enough that I'm not throwing out my whole business model and starting over. That's probably the biggest mistake that I see businesses make, is that you hit either a crisis like this, or you see a big boom like in the mid 90s when the internet took off, and people just say, oh, I'm putting all my eggs in that basket because this is where it's all at. That doesn't make sense. You want to figure out what you do well now, who you serve now, and take a step into an adjacent market, but not completely turn around and do a 180 and go somewhere else. You're unlikely to be successful that way, because you'll either guess wrong, or it's so far out of your lane that you're just not really going to be good at it.
Yeah. Great advice. Any advice for recent college grads? That's a great question.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's probably the toughest. If you're not in a job right now, you're probably in a holding pattern. There are certainly people who are still interviewing at this point. I think most, even the biggest companies, are going to be, slightly hesitant to hire, or at least slow to hire. It is something that is challenging. That said, your price point is very appealing to a lot of employers once we get out of this, and so you need to be looking for those opportunities. But I mean, there's going to be hiring. There's, particularly if you're in the communication space, there's been a talent shortage. The talent shortage, I think, it's now safe to say is likely to be gone when we recover. I think there's going to be a lot of communicators on the market, when all is said and done. So it's not going to be, quite the same seller's market, if you will. I think the agencies and companies that are hiring communicators are going to have, greater selection, which means there's probably going to be downward pressure on salary. But that's, if you're just starting out, that's not a huge deal, because it's not going to dramatically impact your price point. So, there are opportunities there. The other thing is, take this as a learning experience. It is unusual to have the current confluence of events. And so if you're a recent college graduate and you're out there looking, it's a great opportunity to look at how people are handling this from a crisis standpoint, how people are handling it from a proactive communication standpoint. And so, try to absorb as much as you can. There's a huge additional creation of learning opportunities like this webinar. We were talking about how many webinars there are this afternoon. It's an insane number of webinars that are taking place this afternoon. If you're a recent college graduate and looking for work, take advantage of these, because you'll pick up so much. Hopefully, just listening to this, you picked up some tidbits about the industry, about jobs, all that kind of stuff. you'll find that in all of these things. So take advantage of the learning opportunity that it presents. I mean, I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is people who are in college today, or about to be in college. I've got a high school senior, and he's looking at colleges for the fall, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. So folks who are either in college or about to be in college, I think they're the ones who probably have the most uncertainty and we have the least answers for. If you're fortunate enough to have already graduated or be graduating in May, you at least have some certainty over your own future.
And I would say, I have some clients that have open positions and they have pulled down their job postings during this time, but they're still willing to connect with viable candidates and set up Zoom meetings and video meetings to at least get to know them, because they're obviously not doing in-person interviews. And so for college grads that are on the job search, I would say don't give up. My advice has always been don't ever just upload your resume to those job search sites. It's a waste of time. Instead, trying to find personal connections within that company, and reach out and do it that way. So they can still do that at this time. They can set up information interviews with people and do it over video. If nothing else, that'll give them some great practice of conducting a professional interview via video, and also practice the interview skills, because there are some definite skill sets there. Not everybody's great at it. So don't, look at this as just, everything has to stop. I think that, one of the messages today is that how you think about it is a big part of getting through this. If you are simply focused on, oh my God, we're in this crisis, and you are digesting headlines like it is water, it's a mistake. Even we have to step away from that and make sure that we are not just focused on the now, but what's next. Be aware of the reality. Yes, this is going on. Yes, it's serious. Yes, we all need to do the right things and practice, the precautions. And it is an unprecedented time, but this is not our forever. There will be a next chapter to this. And so look ahead and begin to focus on that as well, and to make sure that you are intaking things that make you put you in a positive mindset, and think about the opportunities that are around you, not in a selfish way, but your business people. And there's still problems that need to be solved, and you have a solution to that. So don't be afraid to offer that during this time, or to share it in creative ways. And so for college students, I would say the same thing. Yeah, we're in a pretty weird place right now, but that doesn't mean that no one will want to meet with you or talk with you. And in fact, some of those hiring managers have nothing but time on their hands. We've got some client contacts that are bored. They're at home and they don't know what to do. I mean, they're like, what do I do? Hey, oh, you want me to do that? I'll do that. Raising my hand to do that. As a matter of fact, another of our solos experience, and it was one of the questions, working with a big government agency, and one of her government agency contacts is at home working, and so has excess time and has been taking her work away from her. So she wanted to know how to handle that, particular situation. So stay positive, keep pushing forward, and don't be afraid to be a little persistent in this time. So even with media relations efforts, we know that it's gotten a lot harder anyway. Don't just give up or assume that, oh my God, no, you can't pitch right now. I've seen some people giving that advice, and I'm like, they're crazy. I'm doing the exact opposite. And I've even, I've had more than my fair share of personal media opportunities during this time that have nothing to do with COVID-19. So don't just let other people be in your ear and tell you that there's nothing we can do except sit at home and watch Netflix. No, there's so much more that you can do, and you can keep moving your business forward. Thank you so much, everybody. There's also been some great comments in the chat and great stories. And I know that we're, now 1 minute over. If there are other questions, type them and we'll make sure that we get them answered. I also want to let you know that on the theme of virtual happy hour, We were approached by a teacher, a professor, looking for opportunities for her students to connect and network. So Chip and I are hosting a Twitter chat on March 31st. We'll put out information about that March 31st in the afternoon. Did we say 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock
I believe
Eastern?
so. Yes.
So it'll be another time to gather and share and chat and get great information. And so we hope that you'll join us there. And if this kind of thing is helpful, we're happy to plan some more in the future as well. Maybe to do some stuff by Zoom or to do some conference calls. And so let us know that as well. And you can always, of course, send your questions to Karen at soloprpro.com or to Chip directly, who's Chip at agencyleadership.com, and that should be on your screens. Chip, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for doing this for us. This was hugely helpful.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do for the solo community.
Thank you so much. Well, everybody, have a great afternoon. Stay positive. Remember, even in a crisis, there are joyful moments, so don't forget to lean into those. You guys have been so terrific. Thank you so much for all of the questions and engagement. And we will be sharing out the recording later this afternoon. Thank you.